Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all. My name is Alain Barker, and I am Director of Entrepreneurship and Career Development at the Jacobs School of Music, and absolutely thrilled to introduce the first session of the 2026 Algorithms Summit. It's a summit that now is in its third year. We're super excited about all the programming that we're going to be doing this year and definitely invite you all to join us on this voyage of discovery over the next few days. We're going to be having this conversation today, and then we've got three sessions tomorrow, and then we have a bit of a break while we have a tech playground in person in Bloomington on Friday at IU Innovates, and then on Saturday we have a whole group of amazing conversations. So to start off with, before we actually get going with the session, I just want to do a few quick thank yous to organizations and entities that have supported the formation of algorithms this year. First of all, a huge shout out to Music Tectonics, Rock Paper Scissors, one of our big partners here, founded by Dmitry Vitsa, who is just an amazing human being and has given us so much inspiration for what we do, specifically in this conference, and the team that's behind him. Thank you all so much for everything that you've done to support us. The Mara School of Law, likewise, who are going to be anchoring our conversations tomorrow. Great group of people. This is the third year that we've had a collaboration with them. There is a group on campus at Indiana University called the AI and Digital Futures Group. They've been very supportive and have given us some money to run the conference. Sweetwater, based in Indiana, is one of our sponsors, and excited to see them on Friday. They're going to come in. And then Amplify Bloomington is a new entity. Well, it's actually an old entity that's been rebranded. Used to be called the Dimension Mill in Bloomington, run by John Fernandez and his incredible team there. They're doing amazing things to sort of reawaken and reimagine what the arts and innovation might look like in Bloomington. So we're just thrilled to have you all here. Today's session, I'm going to be very excited to introduce our guests in a moment, but today's session really is helping us anchor this conversation about what is really happening in the world of AI and music. And as we all know, AI is reshaping parts of the creative and professional landscape in ways that perhaps has never happened in the history of humanity, even though there's some very, very strong correlations in terms of other technologies or other things that have happened in the past. But it truly is a time of great change. And so I think it's really important. I personally think it's super important for us to all be deeply involved in this conversation so they can work out where we're going. So the summit hopefully will provide an opportunity to wrestle with major questions about authorship, ownership, environmental impact, cultural disruption, business transformation, and the meaning of creativity itself. So let's jump in. Today, our theme of the discussion is art in the age of mechanical creativity. And the reason for that is that a few weeks ago, Darius von Arman, who's one of our guests today, wrote this really fascinating article talking about how a lot of his own perceptions that I'm going to ask him to talk about, but really how artists are wrestling with this new era and the phenomenon of AI technology, and how identity, creativity, and authorship and ownership are really shifting grounds. So Darius is the CEO of another really great group in Bloomington, Secretly Distribution, Secretly Group, and he's CEO of the Secretly Distribution. He's also co-CEO of the Secretly Group and Secretly Publishing, and co-owner of Merge Records, the Numero Group, and All Flowers Group. Through the Secretly companies, he partners with a diverse roster of artists, including Mitski, Phoebe Bridges, Bon Iver, Japanese Breakfast, Neutral Milk Hotel, I think it's called, and Sharon Van Etten, among many, many others. He serves as chairperson of Merlin and sits on the board of Sound Exchange. And then, very interesting, in 2014, he testified before the U.S. Congress on music license reform and co-authored the Worldwide Independent Network's Fair Digital Deals Declaration. So, Darius, it's great to have you with us and looking forward to this conversation. Darius has an amazing brother, Pindar is an artist, and he is an AR, a self-proclaimed and amazing AI artist. He's an American artist and roboticist based in Washington, D.C., whose practice investigates the boundary between human and computational creativity. And since building his first painting systems in 2005, he has developed a series of artificially creative robots, including Crowd Painter, Bit Painter, and Cloud Painter. His systems paint with brushes on sketched canvas, engage directly with traditional studio methods while advancing autonomous machine authorship. In recent years, Pindar's work has centered on expressive, computationally generative portraiture. Cloud Painter, for instance, received first place in a 2018 robot art competition, with judges recognizing its ability to create evocative portraits across varying levels of abstraction. So, welcome, Pindar, to you as well. It's really, really great to see you. So, with that, I am going to invite Darius to jump in and maybe talk a little bit about what your sense of where this world is going with this emergent technology and where we're headed and how, what are the things that we really need to be thinking about. And before I have you answer that question, I want to just ask Chase to make sure that he spotlights the three of us as we have our conversation. So, Darius.
Okay. Well, Alan, first off, thank you and to the Algorithms conference for having us. It's, I think, a really important thing that you're facilitating here, which is a conversation about where things should go with the intersection of the music economy, art, and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. Um, I I'm always thinking about sort of this question of um, how can creatives uh, sustain their livelihoods? What is ways that great art can help improve culture? How things on the fringes can come into the center? How the mainstream can be sort of informed by uncorrelated, unique artwork. And I think my interest in this question of like what artificial intelligence or generative AI, what impact that's going to have on art, is uh, thinking about on one hand the livelihoods of creatives and human jobs and the dignity of that work and whether that's threatened, but also on the other hand thinking about the quality of the output from generative AI. Is it um, uh, on the level of what human creativity is? Is it something different? And what is the impact to society, culture at large? And so my foundation for this is thinking about our humanity, which is something I wrote about on my essay that you mentioned earlier. And it's thinking about what makes us human. And I think that's a question we're still trying to answer. I'm not going to pretend that I can answer that, especially not in a short conversation here. But for me, things that are very quintessentially human is our desire for connection and that we want to find meaning. And I think that makes us different than the other beasts in the field, so to speak. That we also think about the distant future, and that there's something sort of intrinsic in us that we want there to be progress. And when I'm thinking about this technology now that's emerging, um, it is quite seductive. We very early on, as human beings, were seduced by the tools that we came, that we created that reduced how much time we had to spend doing agriculture, that made hunting more efficient. We got a lot of free time. With that free time, we started to do more thinking and more creating, and we did, tried to connect more, and we tried to find meaning, etc. We started to have ideas of what was aesthetically pleasing. And the human story is connected to this idea of us having more time to think about the human condition and to be artistic And artistic expression is like this very important way that we try to find connection and meaning. And so now we're at a time where the work that it takes to do art, the friction that's there for us to think about what is good art or bad art, the training we have to to go through to become really good in a specific artistic discipline. Um, we're now being offered tools that take that work and friction away. And so I think one of the things that was motivating to me was this the sense that there's a threat now, that there is so much pressure to find ways to become more efficient at creating content, that the economics supporting artists and artistry is so tough right now that anyone who can find sort of a shortcut to creating artistic expression will find be motivated to do it, and just thinking about what does this mean for the future of artistic creation, what does this mean for human beings, and I guess maybe to wrap up this initial spiel. My concern is that you have these models that are averaging and amalgamating and borrowing without permission from the breadth of human creativity, repackaging it, presenting it to us, doing so with great efficacy, um, and it is changing how we consume art and make art. And I think we should spend a lot of time thinking about what that means and whether, you know, we should resist some of that development, or create alternative ways of doing things that preserves what matters to us.
That's great. And I would definitely going to come back to you to ask as a lawyer, like how do we create those gateways? How do we make sure that the environment for creativity is about the artistry and about the human connection and about the human creativity, and at the same time come to terms with the fact that the technological framework is just shifting dramatically. And so how do we situate ourselves in the middle of that and make sure that what we're doing is creative centric. And talking about being creative centric, we've got Pindar with us, who from what I've come across and looked at your amazing, absolutely incredible work, is a lot of what you're doing preceded this revolution that we're all going through. I mean, the advent of ChatGPT obviously shifted gears and made everybody a lot more aware of what AI, generative AI, and all the issues around it are. But for you, you've been involved in this play space as a creative artist for a very long time. So give us your idea. What's your take on how it's propelled you as an artist, and what you're thinking about it now, in the midst of such massive change?
Well, one thing Darius just said that was really interesting. Maybe it's because we grew up together, but like I too spend way too much time thinking about why we think and what makes us special, what makes our creativity, and what makes art so human. So and I talked to Harold Cohen, who I made my first painting robots 20 years ago, and Harold Cohen is an artist who made his first painting robots 50 years ago. And I cold called him and talked to him about it, and he, when I was talking to him, he convinced me that the way, if you really want to understand creativity, and he was a really interesting artist because he hated saying the word creativity, but he told me if you wanted to understand creativity, try and create a system that is creative. And then only when you can do that will you understand creativity. And I think at the time he was thinking it's impossible, so I shouldn't even try and understand creativity. But I set out to do that, and my idea was, however creative I could make this system, my robots, all the different algorithms that run into it, where it stopped, the limits of what it could do, that would tell me what was unique about human creativity. Like what it could do, what it couldn't do is what made us special. With Darius said. And so that's what I've been working on for 20 years. But there's this weird thing that came in. I now believe that machines are probably as creative, if not more creative than us. So I feel like I was going down the wrong alley. I was like chasing creativity is what makes humans specials. But I'm not sure it is anymore. Can robots be artists? Absolutely not. Not yet, anyway. As soon as they're conscious, they will be able to be artists. but they are definitely creative, and Gen AI is evidence of this. Gen AI is making art much more aesthetically beautiful than I ever made, or anyone. But it doesn't have the meaning, it doesn't have the connection, and I like how Darius says it. It's basically what makes the art that he like puts out into the world with his music and all the music he supports is that human connection. And so that, but I think that's the only thing AI is missing. I think everything else is beautiful. It's just like aesthetically perfect. Technically, the colors are amazing. So I'm at this weird situation now where I'm not sure the answer. What I've been searching for 20 years is even in creativity. I think it's outside of creativity. So that's been my practice, and I continue that practice to this day, and making lots of art and lots of painting.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and I'd like to go back to your journey in terms of how you got into this whole technological environment as a way of propelling your own creative vision. But at the same time, you've made a very interesting distinction between what it is to be creative versus what it is to be an artist. And so, can you just sort of unpack that a little bit more? What do you mean by this distinction between being creative versus being an artist?
Oh man, I'm horrible at defining creativity, but my best guess is my best thing that I've done over the years is you're creative. You're doing something creative as soon as you're not brute forcing a problem. You know, there's a problem, you got to solve it. You can brute force it by hitting every number, like solving a password. You hit every combination, or you can get creative and say, "Hey, oh, I know Darius's birthday, and I know his first dogs because I'm his brother. Can I use that to find his password?" And that's a creative solution. So anything that's beyond brute force is creative. And machines are far more creative than us. They can try far more things. They have the collective intelligence of the entire human race now. They didn't a couple years ago.
I guess,
But
Pindar, maybe I'll just push back on that. Isn't that a different kind of brute force, though? If they have like access to everything and they can,
oh yeah, I guess. But I mean, they have like different. You know, I described one a solution to finding your password, and it's a creative solution because it's not brute forcing. But
yeah,
there's 10 different ways I can go after your password. All of them different angle, and all of them a different creative angle. And that's what I'm talking about. The AI is not brute forcing one method. The AI is there's 10 ways to get at Darius's password, and I'm going to try all 10. And that's what I mean creativity. And they can think of far more creative solutions than I can.
yeah. And maybe I'll add, apologies. I'll maybe add this something like as another example of what Pindar is talking about, maybe as a distinction. You can actually imagine like a JPEG or some sort of art file that's two-dimensional. Say it's 600 pixels by 800 pixels. I'm just being arbitrary, and say each pixel can be 256 colors. You can get a machine to actually create every possible image within that grid. And so, in a sense, that is creative, right? In that it's brute force and created the full possibility of images within that framework. But it's not artistic, right? Because it's not really making decisions about what's important. It's not relating it to human experience. It's not, creating distinction between why these few images have meaning versus, all possible images. So I think that's a way of thinking of maybe the difference between just creativity that is just actually something that's generated versus artistic creative.
Right. I mean, there's this whole thing about intentionality, like what it is that we are trying to do as human beings to intentionally create something meaningful in our lives that is connected to our relationship with the world, relationship with other people, the conversation that we're having with other artists, the conversations that we have with politics, just the entire sort of array of the environment in which, as human beings, individually we connect to the world. And so that's where the intentionality comes in. And that is not something that AI doesn't have is not a being. It's not an operative being in the sense that we are. And so I think that a lot of what we're talking about here is this, this friction, the challenge, iterative process that we go through as human beings to create something of real meaning that is telling a story or making a statement or doing something that is intrinsically human rather than machine made. The thing that I'm really
Iterative.
fast. Go ahead.
Oh, iterative is very important in reflection, and we make a piece of art, and then we have feedback loops in our brain, and we say, okay, I like where that mark is going, and I like the mood it's giving, so I'm going to do more of that mark. I like the color of the mood that color is doing next to that. I'm going to do more of that, and that's like, a lot of people think that's like what makes it human, this creative feedback loop. But here's the problem: machines are doing that. Machines are looking at Darius's example of every combination, and it's finding ones with meaning. It's like, is this? I'm trying to convey this emotion. Which of these images convey that emotion? Okay, this image could. They have the feedback now. They have the reflection. They are remarkably creative, and I don't think people realize that yet. But and also when we're peeling back these algorithms and actually coding them, when I'm looking at them, yes, it's all math. All the neural nets I've ever written are pure statistics. But it doesn't mean that, but I have the opposite interpretation of that. It doesn't mean this, oh, since it's pure statistics, it's not what is human creativity. I've actually come to the conclusion that human creativity is probably pure statistics. I think we have the same algorithms going in our head, GANs, neural network, a lot of neural networks, I imagine they're happening inside our heads. And that's,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
but
kind
I think there's a difference though. So yes, there's a human process to art making and decision making. And in the same ways that there could be random factors, a machine can also figure out ways to randomize as well. But I think, the difference is when an artist is creating something, a human artist, I should make the distinction, is creating something. They're doing it from the vantage point of, having walked in their shoes, having lived every day, experiencing what they experience. And they also don't have the advantage of the machine to be able to ingest so much information. So their perspective is limited. And part of what makes artists interesting is that they have limited perspectives in the greater world. And so what they're expressing is really sort of connected to their experience. When a machine, is looking at a bunch of, data and coming up with, to your point, Pindar, a machine is creating, by doing some sort of, technique, linear regression or whatever, to like come up with like, what might be interesting. Maybe it's finding patterns of like, wow, I see like, these cat images on the internet are quite popular, so I'm going to, create some weights over here to maybe create cat images that are similar or whatever. That is a kind of meaning, but it's a different kind of meaning. It's really just derivative. It's saying this meaning is meaning because the average of human experience that I can see some sort of expression of, it correlates to that.
Yeah.
And it's not really coming from that machine's own intrinsic, limited, flawed human experience. And so I think that's a big difference for me when I think about machine creativity versus, human creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
that's
just, Pindar, as you're thinking about that, I just want to let everybody know that we'll continue this discussion for a little bit, and then I'm going to invite anybody who online to ask questions, come up with comments and thoughts about things that you want to be able to talk about. I also want to mention that we have a Discord channel. If anybody wants to jump on there and share ideas and have discussions there as well, I've just put the link in the chat there. So we'll be getting to the audience in a moment. One thing, so Pindar, so I didn't want to get in the way of your response there. So what are we thinking?
Well, I mean, it's going. So I'm not sure where we were, but it's like as far as what were we talking about in terms of creativity, Darius? You're saying that
There's a
the
different,
human
like a difference
experience.
between machine creative, like I don't disagree with you. Like if someone says a machine can't be creative, I think then we get stuck in semantics. What is creativity?
Oh,
Like,
they
Right.
always say, yeah, they always
yeah,
say creativity or creativity with a capital C is how a lot of people talk
right,
about it.
right. And I think everyone, and I think you too agree, like there is something different about the human approach to art making or creativity. Um,
Yeah,
than
but this is yeah okay this okay yeah but I think it's less. Here's what I think. I think like this is the weird thing that people are like really. I think I said earlier AI cannot make art right now. These robots can't because they don't have the intent. Exactly, you say it. There's this artist or there's this project called The Painting Fool by Simon Colton, He's been around forever, like 2010. And he basically built a creative agent, and he writes extensively on the fact that it doesn't have intent, which is what you said earlier, Alan. Intent is very important. Humans intend to create art. That's what makes it art. Machines don't intend to create art. So is it really art? And that's why I say they can't be an artist. But when AI can create art, and I think it's any year now, any day now, I wouldn't be surprised if AI is creating art next week. They're not going to be making it for us. So all this AI art we see of like, that regurgitation of our collective human knowledge, and like, we get something that looks like a Monet, but like crossed with a Picasso. That's not what AI is going to make. AI is going to make art. My prediction is AI is going to make art for other AI. And it's not even going to make sense to us. It's not even going to be, it might not even be visual, might not even be sound. It's going to be something weird, and it's going to be for other AI.
That's
And
amazing.
right? I mean, doesn't that makes more sense? The last thing I think AI wants to do is make art for us, because all art, in my opinion, and I'm is identity art, like Darius said. Like you take the exact same image. You can take an image of someone lying on the ground. This is the example I always use. You have an image of someone lying around the ground, sprawled on the ground. If you show it as a young 20-year-old art school student, kind of boring. If you show it as a quadriplegic person in bed who somehow was able to make this painting, that's really profound, right? It's like our identities are key to interpreting this art. So, and what Darius is like, our limited view and going really deep into who we are, where we are, is what makes the art meaningful to other people that are in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
So AI does not have that. AI does not have like, hey, like, don't you remember that gorgeous sunset? Like, what are you talking about? You don't even have eyes.
Yeah.
And so that's how I see it. That's the difference. That the creator has an identity, and that we identify with that identity. That's why, like, and Darius's paper was awesome, where I think there's this ridiculous statement. Darius, I'm going to butcher it because I don't know. There's a statement that's like, people don't want to spend all this time making guitar, like learning how to play guitar to make music. But when
The
I
minute,
talk to my musician friends, they tend to love music, not only that sounds good, but they can imagine themselves on the stage rocking out next to that artist. They want to be that artist almost. They're in love with the artist, and that's what makes it art. They want to imitate the artist, and maybe want to create art like that artist. So, okay, I'm talking too much, but
this
that's
is great. No, this is totally fantastic. Okay, so there are two things that I want to focus on, which I'm going to ask everybody to think about as well. Number
Sure.
one, I think that until now, we have prioritized the objectivization of art and perfection in ways that AI is now emulating. In other words, the virtuosity of art, as we've prioritized and we've prized in previous decades in the culture that we're part of. I come from the classical music world, and the objectivization of the perfect rendition of a, Mozart sonata or something like that has become so prominent in the way that we value what we do that we're now sort of pushed back to reflect on what are we actually trying to do with our music? What are we actually trying to do with our art? Because AI is competing with that virtuosity. It's competing with the perfection of the art that we've objectivized, the canon of works that we always think is like, the sort of the ultimate human expressivity is these 10 works, and if they can be performed perfectly, then somehow we've created art. And I think that what AI is forcing us to reckon with is perhaps the prioritization of virtuosity is not as meaningful as perhaps other things that we're trying to do with our art. So just want to throw that out as a suggestion to begin with.
Yeah, like maybe it's just the way I've fallen in love with certain artists or the music they make or whatever, but I've never put a big premium on virtuosity. Whether something is high fidelity or the perfect performance again of a Bach sonata or whatever. I do appreciate the craftsmanship of the amazing violinist who can perform something perfectly. But even when I'm listening to a musician perform something at a high level, it's not. I don't value that they're perfectly replicating something. I value sort of the other things they bring to the performance, and that's has always been the way I've been oriented. I think you're right in the sense of, if there ever was appreciation of art along the lines of what can do the most faithful replication of something, what can, if there's a painter who's very good at making something realistic, a sculptor who really could, create a statue that, seemed very lifelike or whatever. I think that is now diminished. I think that's a good thing, because I don't think that's ever really what was important about art making.
Yeah.
And so, if the rise of music making machines or generative AI means that we are now appreciating something else or putting, greater value on art that is, about something other than just faithfully replicating the world or looking at patterns of the past, I think that's a good thing.
Great. Yeah. And Pindar.
Well, I couldn't have said that better. It's like I didn't realize I even thought that, but I think that it's like the virtuosity is no longer a commodity. Everyone's a it could be virtuoso now, right? But even that being said, I think people will absolutely love live performances, continue to love live
Sure.
performance, will continue to love my artworks that are made, and then seeing me working in the studio. Um, yeah, but I agree with Darius. I didn't, he put it really well. I can't add to it.
Yeah, and I think that I'm not suggesting that virtuosity actually is what we've been going after. I mean, the perfection, shall I say? I think virtuosity maybe is the wrong word, but like the objectivized perfection of an ideal.
Yeah.
Because I think that in the middle of it all, somebody just mentioned here, is AI going to work on the best tone, the best color, the best phrasing? Whoever wrote that, Monica, thank you very much, doesn't think so, because those are innately human. Those are the textures. Those are the unknowns that come through with what it means to be really human. And in some ways, AI deals with the known knowns, right? Let's go back to that terrible quote, right? We know the known knowns and the unknowns and what have you. But AI knows the knowns, and what human beings do is to reflect on and to surface the unknowns. And anyway, that we can go down a
It's
big,
that
big,
witchiness, right? Which
yeah,
I'm always fascinated by what humans can bring to something that is hard to quantify.
right.
But
So I'm gonna open up the conversation now. I'd love anybody who wants to ask a question or make a comment, just raise your hand, use the tool there, and we can basically bring you in to the conversation as well. Chase, I don't know if you're watching to see who's out there.
And Alan, and real quick, while we're waiting to
Yeah.
call him, I just want to finish one point on the last thing we were talking about, which is when we're talking about what is the best tone, best phrasing, or whatever. Um, I personally feel like that's almost a technological framing. It's like
Hmm.
about optimization, and I don't think art should be thought about in that way. What is the best art? What is the best color? What is the best phrasing?
Right.
For me, the value of art is not about, um, a hierarchy of like what is good to
The
bad.
objectivization of that
Yeah.
ideal.
I mean,
Right.
my partners, might disagree with me to some extent on this, but I hate things like the Grammys or any sort of like award show that says, "Hey, this is the best album" or whatever, because I feel like it misses the point as to like
Yeah.
what the creation is about, which is about connection, whether it's connecting to a few people to a lot of people, and art shouldn't be a popularity contest. And so
Yeah.
this idea of like what is best art, I feel
Hmm.
like it's a technological framing.
Yeah,
We
Darius
have
has
a
frustrated me with this. Is I always try and figure out like who's your favorite band right now. He does not have favorite bands. It's weird. It's like because that's the wrong way to think about it, and he's opened my mind. You shouldn't think about that. Oh, I'll turn it over to Monica. This is awesome.
Yeah, so we have somebody who'd like to jump into the conversation. Monica, go ahead.
Well, I think it's very hard to keep talking about different media because each one is very different, especially in an AI world. Um, and I think, Darius, you might have misunderstood what I meant by color tone phrasing,
Sure.
because in the non-classical world, which I'm a classically trained musician that works in the non-classical world,
Right.
we don't think of those things. People say, I love Eric Clapton, but they don't say, I love Eric Clapton because he makes this sound and he makes his guitar wail in a way I don't hear anybody else do. And that's what I mean. It's for people that aren't musically trained, it's a non-quantifiable part, but that is the part they actually react to. When he holds the space in a phrase, like that's what makes it different. And AI doesn't do that. I don't think it's ever going to do that. Um, and I also don't think any of this is really going to work unless we can find a functional licensing system within AI. And that's the piece that we really should all be talking about excessively.
Yeah.
Right.
And also and for that though, I think there might be cross media issues because everybody needs an attribution engine. And the way attribution engines work can be a similar technology for different kinds of art. But we're not having those conversations either. I mean, I've been trying to have them. And I would say, not unlike the transition to digital, the music industry at large is so anti-tech that they don't even have the vocabulary yet to talk about what those licensing issues are. So what I wanted to know is like, are you thinking of it that way for your own art, Pindar? And are you thinking of it that way for the music that you distribute secretly, that the licensing piece is really the important part of the whole
It's
mix?
interesting. I'm actually an odd AI artist out there. I'm not unique in this, but it's very rare. And it's that I don't use models that are trained on other artists' work. I refuse. I don't do the prompt art, and it's made me fall behind actually. It's actually one of the big problems with AI right now is I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know the ethics behind it. I don't know if it's stealing from artists. And until I do know, I'm not going to use it. But of course, there's unscrupulous artists that are ripping off Basquiat. He's very popular to paint stuff in the style of Basquiat, and they're exploiting him. And I think that's gross and disgusting. And a bigger issue, and I told this to Darius and Alan earlier, is it's like the AI companies have come and sucked in our collective culture, all the artists' work over the past hundreds of years, and ignoring copyright, and they're selling it back to us. And there's no way to attribute this stuff. It's pure statistics. You don't know how much percentage Picasso is, how much percentage of it is Basquiat. You just don't know, and it's impossible.
This is why the attribution engine is important, and that figuring out how to do that. So two things need to happen. We need a partnership between the people building the attribution engine and the people using it, because you have to map each work in a neural network, and then you have to understand how the AI system is putting together that prompt. If you have both of those things, then you can statistically figure out what the output is.
I was gonna.
I've written these algorithms. I've written the GANs. I've written the things. In companies, I see companies claiming they can figure out how much percentage it. I think they're lying.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, Monica, because there's a lot of conversation about attribution in the music space, and what Pindar is saying is my belief too, is that it's impossible to measure what happens inside the black box of these models, and it's impossible to put a weight on what a model decides to disregard versus what it includes, which is as much as part of the creative process is just deciding what you include. And these different attribution businesses, they are creating some objective way of looking at music outputs and saying, hey, compared to this body of copyrights, this is what we think is influencing this or whatever. But the different attribution systems all come up with different results. There's nothing objective about it. It's just a methodology. I do think there's a value to it.
But I do think that technology is going to be built because it has to be built, and somebody will figure it out.
Well, I was going to say, like, I think the idea of it reflecting something that's the truth is impossible. But what it can do is, if all the licensors to a training model or to a generative AI piece of software or whatever, if they all agree on sort of a common way to do attribution, as long as there's that common agreement, like, hey, let's all rely on this third party to just like tell us how to share the monies coming from this model, then that works, and that's a way to move forward. I think the thing we have to be careful about, though, is, and we've seen this with, like, for example, Sony Music, and I don't want to say Sony Music has bad intentions here, but Sony Music has their own technology for attribution.
That is not highly rated.
Right. It's maybe not highly rated, but let's put that to the side, because over time these things can get better or whatever. But the danger is, the attribution model that Sony might agree to or develop might,
favor Sony Music.
Exactly.
Right. Which is why I believe that needs to be a third party.
And you're absolutely right. And that's one of the big conversations that we're going to be having tomorrow. I mean, hopefully you'll be able to join us as well, because we're going over to the Morris School of Law tomorrow, and there are going to be 2 sessions that are focusing on defensible value and the attribution aspects of what these AI models are doing. So Monica, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to join us. I do want to mention that Moises is an example of a company that's developed a language model that is fully licensed. And they've been very intentional, very careful about how they're developing the content of their entire platform, so that anybody who goes in with usage knows exactly where those licenses are and is using it in an ethical way. The other thing that Moises does is that they don't actually capture the artwork that is being created by the user, which means that there's no fear that by involving yourself in AI technology, you're automatically losing your IP. You're automatically losing the content that you produce. Chase, is there another question?
Yes, I'm going to be selfish and ask a question myself.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of my research is in AI and music creativity. This very thing. This is what I'm doing my dissertation on, and so obviously I appreciate your thoughts and have strong feelings about everything. And kind of going back to some of the stuff that you talked about in the beginning, of kind of like everything that's kind of not brute force is in some sense kind of creative. And I want to just kind of open the question up to either of you. In terms of the probabilistic nature of how AI functions, yes, by proxy, it is producing some meaning, but that is because we are involved in the topic. We are providing the meaning to it. And so when we're prescribing that it is doing those things, that it is producing meaning, I would argue that it is not, because we are involved in the conversation. And that probabilistic nature is exactly that. It is just a probability of letters and samples and colors and audio sounds combined together to create the quote unquote average ideal of the mainstream whatever. And right. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel that we have to be involved in the conversation in order to prescribe that meaning, or is it kind of either of your points to be like, no, it has meaning aside from itself in a vacuum?
Well, I think for now, let's put aside the world that maybe a machine becomes conscious, in the future. It has, we have no idea if it's happened yet. I don't even know if any of you guys are conscious. But put that philosophical thing to the side.
My dad taught us that. Our dad taught us that.
Yeah. But I think you're right. If what meaning means, right, and that's another big conversation. What is meaning? If what we're talking about when we say meaning is like, how does it relate to our experience as a human being? Then I think that kind of answers the question right off, that you can't have meaning then if it's not involving a human being. And so that's involving the human being using the generative AI tool. And I think it comes to maybe the central question that we're now dealing with, which is, as this technology emerges, music making machines or other generative AI systems, to what extent is it remaining a tool that humans are using, and to what extent is it possibly replacing human beings, or the work that they should be doing, or what is the province of the artist? And I wrote about that in my essay, and I think it's going to be a fascinating debate. I think the artistic community should have that debate. We were talking before this call about how the synthesizer, when it emerged, it seemed to replace certain things, um, in the music making world, and you know. But now it's accepted that the synthesizer is a great tool for art making, and it's contributed to such beautiful works. And so, to what extent is generative AI going to be more like the synthesizer and just a tool, or to what extent will it just replace music making by human
Yeah.
beings?
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and that's where I want to go for a period of time in this conversation right now. Is for the most part in the conversation today, we've spoken about how AI is essentially replacing what we've done as artists or what we're doing as artists, and the fear that somehow it's going to overtake us and get in the way of our ability to be the artist that we want to be. And yet at the same time, Darius, as you've mentioned with the synthesizer, and all the way along, as technology has emerged, all the way to I was talking to Dmitry Vitsa a few weeks ago, and he was saying, the harpsichord replaced the lute. I remember being in London in the early 80s when the bus driver started taking tickets, and the bus conductor no longer had a job, and there was an entire strike for like 3 months or something like that because the bus system ground to a halt because there was this belief that the only way that buses could run around London and do their thing is if there's a bus conductor. So and I'm fascinated by almost like as an anthropologist, I'm just fascinated by the fact that through the ages and through the years, and especially over the 20th century, the emergence of technology has enabled us to diversify genres. Electric guitar, as an example, has opened up space for an incredible amount of creativity. Imagine if we were told that the only guitar that we could ever use was the acoustic guitar, right? I'm thinking about TikTok as an example of a platform where when it first arrived, it was just sort of a plaything and nobody quite knew what was going to happen with it. And, it was sort of like a trial balloon thing. And then all of a sudden it took off and it became this massive cultural shapeshifter for how we think about and share popular music or other forms of cultural expression. And so I think that while we're trying to hold on to the past, I truly believe that we're living through this existential moment in which what we value as humans in terms of our traditions of practice will navigate into a place that will be in 10, 15, 20 years time where those traditions of practice, whether it's hip hop, classical, different types of art, different types of emerging art will reposition themselves, and that as human beings, we will continue to flourish as being as creative as we want to be. Yes, is it going to be traumatic? Yes. Is there going to be replacement? Is there going to be like a huge discussion about what IP is? Because don't forget that intellectual property laws as they exist today developed predominantly in the 20th century as a result of what we did with technology in the 20th century and how we created revenue in the 20th century. So we're now in this sort of very weird spot where everything's being thrown out and we're trying to hold on to what we believe is true and valuable to ourselves. But at the same time, I don't think that we're going to lose our way. I think that we're going to find our way through.
Right. I hope so. I was going to say one thing I've been inspired by watching my brother, sort of build his artistic practice. Pindar has always been very curious about what is it that's different between mechanical creativity and human creativity. I remember early conversations I had with Pindar where, Pindar, I think you were creating robots that were painting R2D2 and Darth
Yeah,
Vader and
yeah,
ripping off Lucasfilm and eventually Disney.
yeah. I know.
Um,
Darius is a major influence, by the way, on that, like why that was a bad idea. But
yeah,
I mean, I could not make enough R2D2s. Anytime, everyone just wants R2D2s painted by a robot, and
right.
and
Yeah,
but I realized were they buying Van Arman works or were they buying Lucas works? And I realized
yeah,
they were buying Lucas works, so I cut it out.
yeah. But I think the thing that was like that Pindar's been on the frontier of, which has been inspiring, is he built a painting machine, and he built into it, sort of its own teaching sort of algorithm, right? And there was a whole series he did called Reflection, and was about, creation that was happening by the machine, but the machine would then reflect on what it was creating and then do other additional paint strokes or whatever. And it was a real exploration of what creativity was done by a machine with minimal human input. But that journey was art. What Pindar was doing was art. He was sort of answering questions about human beings, looking into, what makes us different from machines, spending time looking at the outputs and creating context for that. And there wasn't a brute force aspect of it, or an aspect of it that was like just ripping off in a brute force way from other human beings. And it also respected labor and the rights for human beings to have ownership over what they create. So I don't know. That's me. Like, I don't
Yeah,
spend
it's amazing. And that's very different to the prompting non-art that people do. For instance, in Sonar, where you just do a prompt and you get like a regurgitation of a generic song. I mean, that what Pindar is doing is a much more deeply woven, human, intentional, thoughtful process.
Thanks. In mine, it's not really even about the final image. I would say, like, the process artists of the 70s, 80s, it's all about the process. My art really is the system, the synthetic creative system. And anyone's wondering, reflections, those above me, those are reflections up there, portraits painted by the robot. And these are emerging faces, another series I did where I would tell the robot to imagine a face using a GAN, a face that's never existed before, and paint on that canvas until you could recognize a face and then stop. And these were like, these are explorations of the process, because I was trying to say, when I imagine a face in my head, what's happening there? When we close our eyes and try and imagine an old friend's face, what's happening there? And that's what I'm trying to capture is on the canvas. I'm trying to figure out how we think. And I think that's really interesting. AI slop, prompt art, I think is kind of gross. And I say that cautiously because I have a lot of friends that are doing good stuff with prompt art, but it's not the stuff you think. They're doing prompt art like Holly Herndon and Dryhurst. They're doing stuff that's like, they did one thing once where like Holly Herndon was wondering if she could trick the AI model to paint her with dreadlocks. And so she did all this stuff like, spiking a model, and then she did a whole series. So those are interesting, exploring that. But actually, when someone says like, I want to make a cross between a Basquiat and a Picasso, how boring is that? What's that have to do with the artist? What's that have to do with anything? You're making an illustration, and it's not really. I would say everything's art. I'm pretty. If you tell me it's art, I'll believe you. But that's not really capital A art. It's not high art.
So and getting back.
What's that? It's not good art. Yeah.
Yeah, and getting back to the artists, Darius, I want to ask you, because I know that in the article that you wrote, there was this really interesting discussion about how secretly artists, there was this question about whether or not secretly was going to adopt a relationship with a language model, and there was that whole discussion about, is this worth doing? Is it going to enhance the expressivity of artists, and is it going to open up a new avenue of creative opportunity and possibility? Can you take us through a little bit of that? And are there any examples of maybe one artist who's adopted it, maybe an artist who decided not to? And what are the reasons why these artists on the ground are thinking? What are they thinking about as they are given this opportunity?
Yeah, and this is a very interesting question, because I think there's still, putting the judgment aside of this, I think there's still a lot of shame for music artists letting it be known that they actually are using generative AI. So recently, Suno, shared how it had some crazy number of subscribers, like 300,000 or something like that, maybe even millions. Apologies for not remembering the statistic. And what is happening right now in studios everywhere, because these products are integrated with these digital workstations, is that human artists, human musicians are using generative AI in their productions, but we don't know about it. And so I know there's this debate about like, okay, digital services, they're getting so much more content that's created. Some of it is absolute, fully generated slop, that it doesn't involve really that much sort of human creativity. But really, the tricky part of what's about to emerge is where to different levels, human beings are going to be relying on Gen AI to sort of, augment their art, or for example, an artist might say, I really want a string section on this recording, but I can't afford to hire a string section. So what am I going to do? And without, sort of disclosing it to the public, maybe they use Gen AI to bring in
Yeah.
a string section. And so I think that's going to happen more and more. It's already happening. So I think the artistic community, to some extent, has to answer the question as to like where the line is that is appropriate on that or not. I think it's a whole separate set of questions, like what does the consumer deserve to know? What should be disclosed to the consumer? To what extent should streaming services detect or filter out or label AI, partially AI generated content or fully AI content? And these are all the questions we're going to have to answer as an industry. Sure.
On the visual art side, it's interesting at art fairs now. You're seeing more and more artists put a sign next to their art saying "No AI, no crypto," and they just it's just seen as such a gross thing that they're saying we don't use it. But I do know artists that claim that are using it, and I think a lot. So.
Good. Now we have Paul. Paul has joined us here. He wanted to ask or suggest or say something. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Paul.
Thanks for having me on. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah, you get a little closer to your microphone and we can hear you better.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm a pianist, producer, songwriter, all that stuff here in Nashville. And I just was curious to get, I guess, all of you guys' thoughts on something that one of my own artists on my roster for my studio, she actually lives out in Florida. She and I have discussed something in depth that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on. And it has to do a lot with the idea that, as performing artists, songwriters, whatever the niche of music may be, we spend tens of thousands of hours, for those of us who do it professionally, in practice and perfecting our craft, whether that means you're in the recording section or the performing or the compositions, whatever it may be, and sometimes tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, schooling, training, equipment, all that stuff, kind of bringing everything together to create this musical art, in my case, and I'm assuming the same kind of dollars and training goes into those who do visual arts and whatever else it may be,
Yes.
And so I'm thinking, my thoughts were like, with all this effort that goes into perfecting that professional, skill and craft, my conversation with this lady I mentioned in Florida has been, is it really too tall of an ask to say to people, relatively, I'm not really sure it's too tall of an order to ask you guys to, not worry about concerns of cost, maybe save up a little bit of money. If we can spend this much of our lives and our livelihood having this kind of professionalism, is it really too much to ask for people to, okay, is money an issue? Great. Maybe save up a little bit, go into a studio, have it done with that human friction and connection that Darius mentioned earlier. I'm like, I can't be the only one who thinks of it from this angle with, people, cost effectiveness. Well, guess what? It's not as hard as you might think, especially, in my opinion, with all the progression, as you guys have mentioned, with the music technology we've had over the last 30, 40 years even.
Yeah, I think the barrier to entry aspect of it is interesting to think about too. So here's an analogy I like, and I wrote about this, was, what is the marathon runner really sort of enjoy when they cross the finish line? Is it the fact that they finished the race, or is it that it's the culmination of every step of the race that they ran and all the work they did to prepare for the race? And you can't sort of separate the accomplishment from what you invest in it. And that's a very human thing. And I think too, we're in this world where, and to bring it back to what Mikey Schulman said, we're in this world where it's quite a seductive offering for a company to say, hey, you didn't do any work to become a musician. It's a pain, he says it's a pain in the ass. It's hard to learn how to play an instrument. Why do you want to spend all that time doing it? No one enjoys that process. So let me just give you the finish of the marathon.
And for me, it's like, who doesn't enjoy that except for those who don't actually want it as bad as they say they do, you know? It's like,
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm wondering if he actually believes saying that because I read that in Darius. I was like, no, he doesn't believe this. He's just trying to sell his company.
I mean, like
So
the greatest satisfaction for me with whether it's the recording and production part or the learning and performing or the composition part
Yeah.
is I actually enjoy what I do. You know, there was a military guy
Yeah.
who came to my high school years and I mean, I'm older than I look. You know, he was trying to, you know, prove with his military band, hey, look, we're musicians in the military. You can do anything you want. We need electricians. We need hairstylists. We need all the things, right?
Right.
And so, you know, I thought about it. I'm like, maybe. And then I know I don't want to travel that much. But he said something to me that never left me the same. He said, whatever you do with your life, get so good at what you love to do that you have to be paid for it.
Yes.
And I'm like, to me, I'm thinking, that is why we do this for money,
Yeah.
because we love doing it so much that we got so good at it that we should be paid for it, you know? So,
Exactly. Well, it's 1:02 here in Bloomington. It's a beautiful day in Bloomington, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Paul, thank you very, very much. It's really
Thank you.
great to have you with us. Thank you.
yeah, thanks, Paul.
Let me just to sort of round out this conversation, and to everybody, by the way, please join us. We have a lot of phenomenal conversations continuing as we have had today. In the next few days, just go to the website and check it out, and feel free to join us in person or online, whatever you prefer. But I have a final question for both Darius and Pindar here. Is, you know, you've obviously been thinking and embedded in this conversation for quite a while yourself. Where are we headed? Give us an idea of maybe the sort of scenario that you see ahead of us. I don't want to you know, say more than that because I don't want to point you in any particular direction. But you know, if you were to think, okay, in 3 to 5 years' time, this is where these are the big things that we're going to be seeing in terms of the shifting ground and where we're going to be ending up. Where do you think we're headed? Either one of you wants to go first.
I think I want to let Darius close.
No,
So
yeah, you
I'll,
go
do
first.
Okay. So Darius will close.
you want to close, Darius? Because
No,
Darius, this article got us all here.
Well, Pindar, you can start. Yeah, go ahead, Pindar.
So I want to let Darius close because I want to hear his final thoughts. But yeah, no, it's interesting. The future, like I used to be asked, like, will AI replace the artist? And I was like, no, AI will not replace artists. But an artist that uses AI, or well, I'm sorry, it's like, would AI replace humans in work, whatever they do to work? And I'm like, no, AI will not replace humans doing work. But one human using AI will replace 10 humans who aren't using AI. So we better get on that bandwagon. Because you're going to be outflanked by people that are using AI. And it creates the same problem, this really big problem. And it's the same problem for artists and generative AI companies alike, that there are artists and there are AI companies being ethical and they're doing everything by the rules. And then there are AI companies that are just, they don't care. They're just like, I'm sucking all this copyrighted material in. And who's getting ahead? The ones that are being ethical are being left behind. The ones that are being completely unethical are taking everything over. And it's the same problem, the same competition in the art world. You know, like I have, for example, I mentioned earlier, I did not jump on the prompt bandwagon. There's a number of festivals and all, and you know, like art shows and where artists that have outflanked me. You know, I'm not in these conversations or these art festivals because I don't use models, or I'm sorry, I don't use Gen AI, I don't use prompts. So people that I think are being a little unethical. Although I want to clarify, I'm not sure what the ethics of using generative AI prompts are, Gen AI is. So I'm not using because I don't know. But there are people that don't care, and they're getting ahead. And there are big AI companies that don't care, and they're getting ahead. So my fear of the future is that the people that don't care about the ethics of all this are just going to take over. And there's nothing that people that are being ethical can do about it. And I'm really scared about that.
Wow. Thank you, Pindar. That gives us a lot to think about. Wow. Darius.
Yeah, well, I kind of tie, when you say what's going to happen in the future, I'm maybe a little bit pessimistic, with a dash of hope. But I tie the generative AI moment to something that's larger. And it feels like we're entering this era of algorithmic determinism. We are all glued to our phones. When I'm on the subway, we collectively are chasing minor doses of dopamine. We are participating in these systems that are sort of training us on what we want to see or like to go to, et cetera. And so what is right now under threat is our agency. And this technology that has brought so much convenience to our life and in some ways has expanded the world for us. And if you're talking about it from the perspective of a music company who now for the first time can have its music distributed anywhere in the world, you have that access. It seems like we are, the trade-off is that we've now embraced these large platforms that have so much control over what we can hear and see. And so my concern is with generative AI and take it to, whether it's music making, generative AI, or video, or whether it's discourse on sites like, Threads or X, to what extent are we ready as human beings for what's about to come? And to what extent will we be able to resist giving up our agency? And it's about free will and choosing what we want in our lives and choosing what we want to create and choosing what we think is good and what's bad, and not having it all be correlated, keeping things freaky, keeping things messy.
Yeah.
And so there's so much resource coming at us from technology companies. Governments are aligned with these technological interests. To what extent can we create some sort of fabric of resistance to what's about to happen? And I think part of that discussion is talking about where art's going.
Yeah.
But there's a much bigger thing we're about to contend with.
Yeah.
So what's happening in the next couple of years, I don't know. I feel like this is going to answer, a lot about what the human condition is going to be for decades, hundreds of years to come, how we react collectively to this moment.
And even more reason then for us to go into those conversations with eyes wide open and engage the conversation rather than just simply turn our backs away from the conversation. Because if we don't engage the conversation in a meaningful way, all of these big companies, all of these people who are sweeping up intellectual property will go ahead and do it without us resisting how they're doing it as artists. Because I think that this technology is here to stay. I don't think that anybody can question the fact that AI and it's sort of how it interrupts our lives and how it's completely transforming the way that we think about the world. It's not going to just disappear because we press a button and hope that it will go away. It's going to be here. And so the question is, how do we truly lean into that and have conversations like this and then take action and assemble a sort of a force of action that will help us continue to function as the artists that we always want to be as human beings, creative centric.
Well said, Ellen, and to protect what matters, right? Like to sort of really spend time now thinking about what makes us human.
Right.
And how do we protect that? And,
exactly.
And we've been through a lot of disruption in the past, like television, changed how we are as humans. The iPhone has, other technologies have, and now we have our newest big boss that we have to deal with this emerging AI technology. And I think now you're exactly right. It's a time that we need to be active as human beings and think about what we want from the future instead of letting it be dictated to us.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, please, everybody, help me thank Darius and Pindar for being with us. So grateful that you could spend the hour with us. Really, really, really grateful. And to invite you all, please, to join us for the other conversations that we're going to be having this week. Tomorrow we start at 12 o'clock over at the Mara School of Law. We've got a session at 12, at 1:30 and 4. We've got a really just great set of conversations ahead of us. And Pindar and Darius, I cannot thank you enough for having set the stage for a week of great conversation. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much, everybody. Take care.
Talk to y'all later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Right, did everyone just hang up? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
See you later, Alan. Thanks.
Yeah, take care. Pindar, thank you. I'll be in touch.
All right, cool.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it. Chase, are you still there?
Yes, I am here.
Great. And did you stop the recording? Are we good?
I was just going to give it a little bit longer, but I can stop it now.
Sure. And we've got Phil and Carl still with us.
All right, the recording is done.
Great. Phil, it's great to see you. Thank you very much for being
Hey,
with us. Yeah,
enjoyed the conversation.
good.
Yeah, yeah, it made me think of a few things as you were talking, like maybe things like Mozart or Bach was like the AI of their day that kind of brought in everything they saw around them and kind of made their own thing out of it.
Right.
And I guess a
Exactly.
lot of people were jealous because they kind of got overshadowed
Uh-huh.
by,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the history of human creativity is a new generation of ideas coming through, new technologies interrupting others, disruption, people losing jobs, people gaining jobs. I mean, it's just a very complex world that we've been part of through the centuries. And the only thing right now is that AI seems to be so much more dominating than any of the other changes that we've seen. And
Well, I
so,
also thought of you might have heard of Walter Benjamin's Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. It's a pretty
right,
well-known
right, of
thing.
course. Yeah,
All these LP reproductions of that is in Glenn Gould. That's interesting because he was kind of against live thing and really up for the recordings. And other people say, well, recording, you listen to the same thing over and over again. It's not the same thing as live because live can be different, something how
sure. Yeah.
communicating and stuff like that. So
Great. Well,
a lot of
I'm glad that it
sparked a lot
stimulated
of
lots of
thoughts.
thoughts in your mind. It's great to see you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, take care. Bye bye. So Chase, I just wanted to check in with you about how things went.
Yeah, I'm gonna